If you have the capacity to start something new, start something that, whether it's nonprofit or for profit, it addresses a really big problem.
Thank you very much, everybody. Welcome back. My name is Rich Friedrich, here today with Bruce Friedrich of the Good Food Institute. This man has been on a mission for the last 6 years to build an ecosystem around the plant-based protein movement, move us into a sustainable food environment where we don't need animal proteins to sustain life or to even thrive as individuals.
I am Bruce Friedrich. I am the founder and CEO of the Good Food Institute. And the mission of the Good Food Institute is to get to a place and a world where alternative proteins are no longer alternative. GFI does is focused on creating a world where as much meat is made from plants and cultivated from cells as possible.
What was the starting vision for GFI, and why did you start this organization?
So the genesis of the Good Food Institute was from the United Nations that globally the world will be producing 70 to 100% more meat by 2050. So looking at that trend line and thinking about the external costs of meat production, which include pandemic risk, antibiotic resistance risk, climate change, biodiversity loss, cruelty to animals, all of that ticks up as meat production ticks up. And then we saw Beyond Meat and Impossible Foods. And those guys were talking about, we can make something that satisfies meat eaters using plants. And so basically meat is made up of lipids, aminos, minerals, and water. Plants also have lipids, aminos, minerals, and water. You can figure out how to give meat eaters everything that they love about meat, but you can figure out how to do that with plants. That is a huge value proposition. And then from there, is there room for a nonprofit organization? Is there room for a community builder? Is there room for open access science? And we thought, absolutely. Rather than one more company, let's build the entire ecosystem.
How did you get started on this? Because that's not a small task.
Well, I spent probably the first 6 months just talking with people about what's needed. And what I came up with in terms of what's needed, when Bill Gates wrote his book, How to Avoid a Climate Disaster, I felt kind of super validated. He said the three legs of the stool when you're trying to figure out how to combat climate change, you need the science, you need to build the technologies that will replace the dirty technologies, essentially. And he said you need policy, you need science, and you need industry. And from the beginning, that's what GFI has been focused on. We've been focused on industry, which is kind of where we started. How do we build more Beyond Meats, Impossible Foods, Eat Justs? From there, we realized that building ties to the incumbent meat industry and the incumbent food industry was going to be critically important. So our corporate engagement department does everything from pre-entrepreneur to investor to big food. And then the third leg of the stool is policy, and that's got two sides: government support for these technologies, private sector incentives for research and development, open access science, centers for excellence, those sorts of things. And then on the other side, making sure that there is a clear regulatory path with maximum amount of transparency around getting novel food technologies to market. So we're building an ecosystem around those three pillars.
So as you build this ecosystem, I'm calling it a movement because you're just bringing everyone together into a platform to kind of move on these goals. And the goals that you've set, I mean, that's a really long horizon arc kind of goal. How do you measure success along the way? Like, what do you look at when you're like, we're headed in the right direction, or this team is really doing well, or we broke through here? How do you keep the momentum of the ecosystem as it's going along?
GFI uses the OKR system that was popularized by Google. Until 2022, everything fit into 6 objectives, and then there would be 5 to 9 key results, and the key results were basically smart KPIs. And so 3 times a year, we measure our progress across our measurable KPIs to ensure that there's continuous forward movement. And then annually, we take a step back and basically recalibrate and figure out, what did we learn this year? Where do we need to, double down? Where do we need to scale back, et cetera? So literally from the beginning of the organization, we have been doing recalibration across what are our key results, how do they fit into the objectives, how does that fit into the overall mission, and we've been doing that continuously. So if you're looking at something like government support, it's literally how much money is flowing into alternative proteins research from governments and how much private sector activity is being incentivized is one of the key results. On the industry side, it's which of the biggest food and meat companies have launched endeavors and how deeply have they gone on this, and then if you're looking at the scientific scientific ecosystem, peer-reviewed published papers, scientists who have gone into this field, the number of people we get at our scientific seminars. So, and we track relationships from those mixers. We've been super laser focused on being able to measure the outcomes of the work that we're doing, literally from the very beginning.
How do you continue to look at how you develop value for the three different pillars and the many different stakeholders that you engage? Something you're constantly looking at and saying like, look, the ecosystem, the movement, we need to do this, we need to do this, or do you just find that it starts to actually take on a life of its own, and that's what you're trying to achieve?
Yeah, I mean, GFI's global battle cry is that governments should be funding alternative protein open access science, and governments should be incentivizing private sector R&D and private sector manufacturing and infrastructure build out. So GFI, we'll be north of 200 people by the end of 2022, and we'll have significant operations in 6 countries. That is that's less than pocket change for the government of the Netherlands. And this is it is just literally true. The Paris Climate Agreement is impossible unless we address agriculture. Yeah. And this is the only agricultural solution that analogizes to renewable energy and electric vehicles. This is the only thing where we can simply replace the dirty technology with a cleaner technology using markets. Literally everything else that's been posited requires significant government programs, which means the work in China doesn't help the work in the United States and vice versa. And what that means is it is essential if governments are going to keep climate change under 1.5 degrees Celsius relative to pre-industrial levels, the pledge of the Paris Agreement. This is it's impossible to 10 billion people by 2050 to increase meat production by 70 to 100% unless we are making meat from plants and cultivating it from cells. So that is the battle cry, convincing governments that they should be putting billions of dollars into open access science and incentivizing private sector activity is the single-minded focus of the organization. And we need the corporations to support this and move in this direction because they need to be doing the work that's incentivized by governments. And we need massive additional numbers of scientists who are there with their hands out saying, yes, I want to create a lab at Harvard Medical School focused on cultivated meat. I want to create a lab at the Cornell Ag School focused on plant-based meat. So it's sort of an all of the above strategy, but all focused on the science of making meat from plants, cultivating meat from cells so that it satisfies meat eaters and wins in the market.
There's a lot there. I'm going to simplify to one question. What's your business model then? How do you fund this massive ecosystem? Because if you're not consumer facing, you're more business facing, but also regulatory, but also scientists. Who's funding you? Are you finding that corporates are giving you the money? Are you doing fee for service work? Like 200 people is a lot of people to be funding. So what's the business model that you created and how is that adjusted over time as well?
So GFI is 100% funded by philanthropy. We don't take any corporate money other than to cover the cost of our conference. So we have taken specific sponsorship levels for our conference, corporate money. When a company says, hey, we just love what GFI is doing and we'd like to give you some money, we don't solicit that money, but it goes into sponsoring open access science, and the companies don't have any say into what science they are sponsoring. But the idea is we put about $5 million a year into open access science, and so any corporate money that we would give that isn't sponsoring that we would receive that isn't sponsoring the conference would go into that. But in all of time, it's been south of $50,000. So we have 7 usually couples or foundations that give us 7 figures, and then sort of down from there. But it's people who care about climate or people who care about animal protection or global health or one of the issues that we're solving for.
So if you're working with high net worth individuals and foundations, does that come out of, are they really looking at the awareness side? Are they trying to build the ecosystem? Like what's their goal that you're seeing and why they're engaging with you? And have you been attracting different types of donors, say from when you started, who I'm guessing were probably close friends or colleagues or people that knew you from previous, professional work, to now where there's a different group of people getting engaged because they really see the potential and they believe that you're under resourced?
Yeah, it's definitely the latter. I mean, Rich, our pitch is we can't meet Paris Agreement goals unless there is a shift to alternative proteins. And GFI is this insanely impactful, fully transparent organization. Your return on investment with our policy work in particular, but really we are building an ecosystem. And to the degree we are successful, it's essential to meeting Paris Agreement obligations. It will be a boon for biodiversity, and it will take the risk of your food causing another pandemic or contributing to antibiotic resistance from huge to zero. So those are two risks that are probably as existential as climate change and biodiversity loss. And they go from huge if we're making meat the way that we make it today to zero if we shift to alternative proteins. And then you add climate change and the Paris Agreement and biodiversity. And as you said, the ecosystem building that GFI is doing. And it's a pretty easy proposition for a climate or a global health funder to get behind what it is that we're doing. And then the level of integration that they get. The other thing we hear from funders is how excited they are to read our monthly reports and really feel like they have a window into precisely what the organization is doing. And we hear pretty regularly, GFI does more in a month than a lot of organizations do in a year.
What are the shifts that you think need to still happen before we hit the goals that you're trying to achieve? Like what are some critical steps that you want to see over the next 5 or 25 years, whatever your timeline is, to getting to that point where we're at animal protein zero and the world has gone on a sustainable food path?
Yeah, I mean, this isn't an app. So this isn't as simple as, convincing people to download something on Spotify. With food production systems, like there are scientific challenges, and scientific challenges, they are challenges. So on the plant-based side, GFI, late last year, we released a production volume modeling report, basically answers the question on the basis of a lot of conversations and interviews with people in production agriculture. What are the supply chain in particular hurdles that we're going to have to clear to get to 6%? So from where we are now at about 1%, if we want to be 6% in 2030 on plant-based, for starters, there's not enough coconut oil. So we need to find an alternative to coconut oil. There is enough soy protein isolate, and there are enough peas, but there's not enough production capacity to turn the peas into the raw material that goes into plant-based meat. There's some challenges that non-raw material challenges in terms of production technologies. So we've been using the same production technology to make plant-based meat literally for decades. There's some pretty impressive and exciting work happening at Wageningen University in the Netherlands using shear cell technology that's a lot more efficient. And the really exciting thing when you say the words a lot more efficient also mean that you can bring the cost down. So even though it is significantly, the resource inputs are a fraction to make plant-based meat, but if you don't have the supply, like if the farmers are literally not planting the crops, the fact that it's a lot more efficient doesn't bring the price down in the way that the price should come down. If the CapEx costs have not already gone into the product and you need to be building factories and to produce the products, price is going to be artificially high, even if the efficiency is 10 times greater or 20 times greater in the case of beef. There are similar stories to be told about cultivated meat. What does it look like to scale up from 5,000 liters to 20,000 liters to 200,000 liters at production volumes? What does it look like to go from medical grade media for cell multiplication to food grade media? Where do you find the synthetic albumin? Is there an alternative to synthetic albumin? So there are lots and lots of things that need to happen, and that's why this is what governments exist to do. Governments put lots and lots of money into renewable energy and electric vehicles. Governments put lots and lots of money into the current system. Just like governments are putting lots of money into subsidizing fossil fuels, they're putting lots of money into subsidizing the current production systems. Shifting some of that money or just adding incentives for alternative systems is just so critically important to clearing these hurdles.
It's interesting you didn't mention consumers, though. Is consumers a piece of this really, or is it just you need the product, you need the supply, you need the technology, and if you do that, the consumers will be there?
That has been GFI's basic thesis for a while. Like Henry Ford said, if I'd asked people what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. The early consumer polling on something like the iPod was no. I don't want to put a bunch of songs randomly onto this thing in my pocket. I want my Walkman. Which was just sort of a new way of delivering the same technology. And the iPod comes along and it's a radically new technology. Similarly, the car is a radically new technology. So I will say the early polling about consumers is super positive, even for cultivated meat, even when you call it in vitro or lab grown meat.
Yeah.
And I think the brainstorm there is people are eating meat despite how it's produced,
Yeah.
not because of how it's produced. But we do need the early adopters on the plant-based side, so we're somewhat rethinking that. But GFI has mostly been focused on if we can make these products taste the same or better and cost the same or less, that is our focus. And there are lots of people who are better positioned to sort of rally consumers behind it than we are so far. Like, we're a policy, corporate engagement, science organization. We don't have the sort of vast reach of a Greenpeace or a World Wildlife Fund. So bringing them on board on the consumer side is probably going to be really important.
Last question. There's going to be entrepreneurs, aspiring entrepreneurs, either watching this or are just inspired by the work that you're already doing and want to start their own movement, build their own ecosystem. What are 3 tips you'd give them to get them started on the right path towards, solving a problem that they see in the world?
I mean, this is somewhat cliche, but resilience/grit is the #1 quality that somebody who's starting something new needs. And I suppose that goes with either a high tolerance for chaos, the sort of move fast and break things obviously gets a bad rap because of all of the broken things that came out of Silicon Valley. But the reality is, if you're going to start something successful, stuff is going to break, whether you move fast or not. So resilience/grit/tolerance for chaos, and a recognition, getting a support community of other people who are doing something similar. I think one of the things I just absolutely love about Y Combinator is that basically the job of their mentors is to say, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. You got this. You got this. It's going to be okay.
Yeah.
Everybody else who's ever started something worthwhile has experienced what you're experiencing. And then I think the third suggestion is to really think about where you can have maximum impact. So the planet is on fire. There are really big problems in the world. The world doesn't need another, maximum profit app. If you have the capacity to start something new that, whether it's nonprofit or for-profit, it addresses a really big problem, because there are really big problems. And if you have a lot of energy to give and a lot of energy to start something, starting something that is just profit focused or just, diversion focused for people is not the best use of your time as a human being who can make the world better. So focus on making the world better.
I agree. Thank you very much, Bruce, for your time. Really appreciate it. This has been phenomenal.
Absolutely. My pleasure, Rich. I'm honored and delighted to have spent a little bit of time with you. Thank you.